This is a market analysis around exit 18 right off of Route 24, looking at development opportunities and specifically some life science industry opportunities both in that area and more broadly in Brockton. So I'll be presenting the study findings today. In terms of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the study objectives and the context for this work. Go into a little bit more depth on the existing study area conditions. Give an overview of the market analysis that was done. That was a mix of data as well as stakeholder interviews. Then I'm going to present a couple of development options along with a few potential next steps in trying to advance development in that area of Brockton. So just a little bit of background on this project and why we did it. So Good Samaritan Medical Center, using the acronym here, GSMC. The hospital is one of the city's largest employers, about 1,900 jobs. It sits on a roughly 41-acre site just off of Route 24, exit 18. And there is undeveloped and underutilized land surrounding it, both that they own and some other parcels, both commercial and residential. So we think that there is some development opportunity there. On the other side of Route 24, of course, is the Westgate Mall. That has been targeted, the Westgate Mall and the hospital, as a redevelopment area in the city's comprehensive master plan. This area was also designated more recently as an opportunity zone. That's a new federal tax policy opportunity with incentives for private investment. Essentially, investors get tax credits over a series of years if they invest in eligible projects. So that's a new tool for development. So the objective here was really to conduct a market analysis of the study area strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and present some specific development options to try to move things forward. Obviously trying to inform the chamber, the city, and other partners about these next steps. And the focus here on some development that could provide greater levels of economic value and property tax revenue for the city and its residents, looking at some highest and best use development for Brockton. This slide here provides an aerial view of the facility as well as some of the wetlands that exist on the site. So outlined here is the area that is owned. It's actually technically owned at this point by a real estate investment trust, but it is operated fully by GSMC and Stewart Hospital. The primary hospital facility is here. The wetlands are these areas that you see. There's also an office building with some tenants, but some empty space there as well. The areas that are not wetlands, there's a fair amount that's sort of wooded, and then on the I guess east side of the site, I think cut off slightly, is right over here is where Harbor One Bank's corporate headquarters are. So this is another view here. This shows property ownership and some of the specific properties. So you can tell like all this area here is the same single owner. But then surrounding it, there's a whole big mix of property owners, including an interesting parcel, essentially, I think a residentially zoned parcel that juts into the site, and a number of smaller ones over there, as well, again, with the Harbor One on the east side there. So one of the things that we did is that we pulled up the parcel data from the city's assessor database to look at the actual size of individual parcels, as well as the assessed property value, and then from that you can estimate the property taxes. So again, the top three parcels, they're different individual parcels, but with the steward Good Samaritan having control over those. We have Franks of Plymouth, we have Cardinale, I'm not sure, Plaza, owning some properties. Harbor One, their site is just over 3 acres. Across the way is a Walmart site, almost 15 acres. When you add that in along with the others, it's almost 74 acres. The assessed value of the Stewart properties is at $65 million. When you convert that using the millage rate or the tax rate, estimated $2.2 million contribution in property taxes. This just shows some of the other major parcels. Walmart, and this is the assessed value, assessed at $12 million. Harbor One Bank, next largest at $8.8 million. And then for context, the Westgate Mall, that's about 40 acres and assessed at $30 million. So similar size as the Stewart Good Sam site, but actually the assessed value is about double at the hospital. It's also worth noting the city owns about 81 acres west of Route 27, that's North Pearl Street there. There is an existing cemetery as part of that 81 acres, but there's also quite a bit of woods and wetlands, and we'll come back to that in a moment. In terms of some of the key site and study area attributes and strengths and weaknesses, it is essentially flat with full utility access. So that includes electricity and gas and water and sewer. Almost 60 acres in the GSMC area, and some more future development land possible east of Route 24. This area obviously has great highway accessibility right off of Route 24, and the hospital as a 1,900 person employer, along with all kinds of visitors, patients, they're drawing from the region. So this is a site that's sort of proven as a regional draw. There's also direct bus transit service to the hospital, and it's about 2.5 miles from the nearest commuter rail station. So it doesn't have really walkable commuter rail, but you certainly could take shuttles or do a short drive from there. Let's see, other study area uses, property owners. So at Stewart, they have some office space currently. About 20,000 square feet is sitting empty. There's a wide mix of retail and restaurants and a car wash, and about 5 households and other quite small residential parcels, which when we get further along we think could be potentially part of a site assembly plan down the road if looking to do more development in that area. As I mentioned, there's multiple wetlands on the parcel. One of the things that I've spent quite a bit of time talking through is the notion of wetlands replication, and you essentially develop on some of those wetlands if you can then replicate wetlands in another location. And there's both local, regional, and state precedent for doing that sort of thing. It's not necessarily easy. All of the wetlands are over 5,000 square feet, which means that things just get a little bit more complicated with the state environmental regulations through Mass DEP. But that is something that can be worked through, if development is, if there's a development plan for the site. And I guess just to go back to the land that the city owns, one idea is that you could do some wetlands replication in that city-owned land just to the west of Route 27. That's something the city has already been thinking about. Turning to some of the economic and market data for Brockton, the unemployment rate, recent rate for Brockton is about 4.8%. Okay, so that's slightly higher than the state and slightly higher than the region, which is down there at 3.9. But when I was doing a similar presentation 2 years ago, Brockton's unemployment rate was about 7. So it's actually come down quite a bit just over the past couple of years as the economic expansion that we're continuing to have has reached the city of Brockton, and for anything under 5 is a pretty low unemployment rate. And you can see the job growth. Statewide it's 11. That's really driven by Boston and Cambridge, but 8.7 job growth rate since the recession is pretty strong. In terms of workforce, the percentage of adults with a bachelor's degree, that is a little bit low in Brockton. That's one aspect connecting to the life sciences industry where, ideally, you'd have education statistics that are a little bit stronger. But it's important to know that, any company thinking about Brockton isn't going to be drawing only from Brockton. They're going to be drawing from a regional labor market. Labor markets are regional by nature. And when you look at some of the surrounding cities and towns, the education levels are higher, ranging from about 26% in Bridgewater up to 48% in Easton and 55% in Canton. So, the region as a whole certainly has a strong and proven workforce. This is just taking a look at the mix of jobs, the share of jobs by industry in Brockton. The workforce development area, which is a formally designated set of cities and towns that BAWIB, the Brockton Area Workforce Investment Board, works with, and then the state. At the city level, the one that jumps out for sure is healthcare and social services. That is in Brockton a mix of both the hospitals that exist, including not just Good Sam, but also Brockton Signature Hospital, the Veterans, the VA Hospital, Brockton campus. It also includes social services, which is a lot of different forms of nonprofits. A little bit lower in Brockton and the region on professional and business services than the state. Something biotech R&D often is most commonly in that category there, so that's one with a little bit of room to grow. Manufacturing, the share of jobs is relatively low, throughout at this point, but there are still niche opportunities in biomanufacturing and medical instruments that are worth keeping in mind. Looking at the retail side, this is the industrial market. For greater Boston, it's quite a positive story. The blue is the vacancy rate. You can see the vacancy rate coming down pretty steadily over the last 10 years or so. And net absorption, this is the cumulative absorption of industrial property. The leading aspect of that by far is warehousing. Warehousing has been the big driver of industrial property gains. Probably not warehousing as a big opportunity in this study area. This breaks down some sub-market data on the industrial market. Vacancy rates are pretty low in the region. You can see the quoted or the lease rate per square foot, just about $1 below the state average there. So turning to the office market, which I think through interviews might be a little bit of a stronger opportunity over time in this area. This is the annual net absorption for the region, and you can see what a big hit the office market took in the recession. Everything is positive except for the depth of the recession here. 2010, you're still in the recession, so just the most minuscule increase there. So on an absorption level and a vacancy rate level coming down quite a bit. What's interesting though is that the lease rates of office space have been fairly flat. And if you look at the pre-recession to today, they're almost the same. So some office space is being filled now, but in terms of like the overall demand and what office space is getting per square foot, it's a little bit, it's not what you might think given the economic expansion. In the region here, these three markets, which include 128 South, 495 South, and Attleboro, New Bedford areas, in the 18 to 20 range per square foot. Regionally 23, Boston, Cambridge, they're getting upwards of 40, 50, 60 depending on whether it's Class A or not. So one of the big challenges with office is building speculative office, and can you actually get the tenants and the lease rates to support it. Final thing I'll say about office is that a big overall trend is that companies in general are using less square footage per employee. So what that means is if you have 100 employees, the amount of square feet that you need tends to be less than it was, say, 10, 20 years ago. It's partly telecommuting, it's partly some of the open office plans that have been developed, but they're definitely sort of cramming more people into a smaller area. Like I mentioned, conducted interviews with a range of different development experts and stakeholders as part of this work. That includes both local, regional, and state level development experts. I guess I'll mention sort of specifically, we did speak with Harry Bain, who is, Chris, what is his official title at this point?
CEO.
CEO, I was going to say president. So he's CEO of Good Samaritan Medical Center. Also talked to the regional planning folks at Old Colony, some real estate folks, the Mass Bio, that's the state's biotech industry association, which had good input. Let's see, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, so just to give a sense of some of the market conditions in addition to the data I presented a minute ago. In general, the industry, industrial and general commercial real estate markets may be about as strong as they've been in 30 years. And so that's a good thing. Now, the industrial opportunities near Good Sam are probably limited. I'd say limited towards smaller scale, like light industrial, such as biotech or medical, like biotech contract manufacturers or medical instruments, that are looking for something in the, 10 to 40,000 square foot, range. Medical office space, that was one we looked at early on in the project. It's one of the few kinds of office space that is being constructed. But what we learned is that there actually is a decent amount of that space in the market today. Washington Place in Easton, that's a multi-building development that's come on in recent years, very close by. There is some empty space already in the Good Sam or Stewart site, and some empty space over by Signature Hospital as well. So not obvious that there's a need for more medical office space at the moment. There also was a study by MIT, advisors and students on life sciences in Brockton and other gateway cities. Their overall suggestion in Brockton was trying to continue to identify and build assets towards a life sciences industry. Places like Worcester and Lowell are probably just a little bit further along in some regards, and that includes both the workforce and real estate assets that can help the city position itself for future growth, which biotech and life sciences really is a growing industry. And anyone you talk to about bio, like, there continues to be growth. Some of the largest biomanufacturing opportunities probably aren't a fit here. They're asking for 20 acres or more of land, but contract manufacturing is a future opportunity, as well as potentially lab or R&D space. And then Lynn Laboratories, that's an existing Brockton company that I was able to speak with. They're a very good example of a firm doing work with between two buildings, about 95,000 square feet and 90 employees. They're having a lot of success drawing workers from Brockton, including hourly workers. They also have positions that are salaried and require chemist and pharmacist type degrees. So it shows that companies certainly do exist in the area. The suburban location has been attractive for them, and that's one of the aspects they think could actually work well in the Exit 18 area. So in terms of the development options that we took a closer look at and some considerations, one opportunity opportunity I'm describing as a phased expansion of the Good Sam campus with synergistic business opportunities. So basically what that means is trying to find some business opportunities that are aligned with the Good Sam Hospital that could happen fairly in the near term. A second option is likely a longer-term development plan, which would start with a master plan for the overall study area, not just the Good Sam site, but the broader area, including potentially the Westgate Mall, and working towards an urban renewal area. I'll talk about that more in a minute. There's also a state program called the Site Readiness Program that has some emphasis on site assembly, which is relevant here, which is, I think, something Brockton should strongly consider for the site. Brockton's bio-ready community status, currently gold, should they go towards platinum. And then from the MIT study, there was a recommendation to form a regional life sciences coordinating council. I'll talk just a little bit more about that in a moment. So what do I mean by a phased expansion? This is really looking at some business opportunities over the next 5 to 10 years to try to generate some additional jobs and tax revenue in the near term. And some of the opportunities that were identified, were listed here. So one could be senior supportive housing, where they would have close access to the hospital facilities as needed. Recovery center, in particular for people who don't need to be at the hospital overnight, which is extremely expensive these days, but could be at a different kind of recovery and rehab center. Daycare facility, which could be very appealing to the 1,900 workers and visitors at the hospital. And then, both either in the near term and positioning for longer term, R&D and lab space is another possibility. To make some of this happen, though, and to reach the development potential, see a need for some property acquisition and site assembly, as well as addressing the wetlands and the idea of wetlands replication. And then a site readiness grant could be a way to advance that kind of work. So the second kind of big development opportunity that we profiled, starts with a master plan. As I said, the city has identified this area, and one of I think the overall arching questions is how long will the mall survive and thrive? Some malls are continuing to do well. What the Westgate Mall is in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years is probably, a little bit of an open question based on the trends today, but certainly, that's one aspect of this kind of opportunity. So an idea is to start with a master plan for this broader study area, not just the Good Sam parcels, but who would that be funded by? Either the city or some public-private partnerships, potentially. But if you had that master plan, that could lead to an urban renewal area. Urban renewal areas allow for, or can help facilitate, site assembly and property acquisition. In the city also, like I mentioned before, as an opportunity to leverage the opportunity zone status with private investment tax credits. And this could produce significant economic impacts and property value gains over time. Will the market support it? And if so, how soon? I think in a big picture vision, there's a lot of appeal here, but it might make some sense, as I'll say in a moment, to work hand in hand with the hospital. Couple of other considerations and ideas. I mentioned the Site Readiness Program. They have, it's every 6 or 9 months, grant applications are open. These are specific. One of the specific things that you can do with a Site Readiness Grant is work towards site assembly on large, complex development projects with commercial uses, which is exactly what this is. A grant on site readiness could also help determine what the specific plan is for wetlands. On the bio-ready community status, should the city go for platinum, there's a need for a pre-permitted shovel-ready parcel and or 20,000 square feet or more of office space that is ready to go for biotech. From our study, it looks like there is both a parcel and office space that could fit those categories, and the city, and with Good Sam, could try to pursue that, and that might help expedite actually getting up to the platinum status, which would be another kind of feather in the cap or tool in the toolbox in terms of drawing biotech. In terms of initiating a regional life sciences coordinating council, I think the overall idea is, there are some companies operating in this space. Can we pull them together and work on some things collaboratively, perhaps workforce? Based on interviews and my findings, I think it's best to start with an informal meeting or two of some regional development leaders and life science industry members and see what the interest is in doing something like that. Those kinds of initiatives are not easy to sustain. They typically require a decent amount of private sector interest. Can there be a project, to work towards together? If so, maybe that idea could have some legs. So just to wrap up, the study concludes with some potential recommended next steps. Really do see the city, the chamber, and others partnering with Good Sam to pursue a strategy of near-term wins that, in terms of business opportunities that would be aligned and compatible with the hospital, critical to that is that the hospital really does need to lead a strategic master plan for their expansion opportunities. So, if they want to be help facilitate some development on their sites, they need to decide to some extent, okay, do we want to go forward with a daycare facility? Do we want to go forward with a recovery center? If so, do we need a developer to help us with those projects? The city typically is a lead on a site readiness grant, so that would be they could be the lead, but would need close partnership on that. You'd want to make sure to keep biotech opportunities in that as part of that master plan. So that's, I think, really the core of the next steps there would be going after a site readiness grant and trying to work with and encourage Good Sam to take some next steps on prioritizing expansion opportunities. I also put down here, continue to engage with the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center on education and workforce training. The city and some of its partners have received some funding from the Life Sciences Center recently, and it's part of just building the overall kind of ecosystem and workforce to support this industry. And then, like we mentioned a minute ago, trying to target some of the land and empty office space to try to earn platinum bio-ready status. I think a little bit of effort, could potentially get up. You could at least determine if you qualify, and ideally would actually earn that platinum status. And then finally, determining how best to leverage the opportunity zones in that new tax credit program. So with that, I'll conclude, but appreciate the chance to present the study findings today. Thank you.
So Dan, in terms of some of the opportunities to access either state or federal incentives for these particular sites, you mentioned the site readiness money from Mass Development, I believe.
Yep.
And the opportunity zones. Can you talk a little bit about those and if there are any others that you know of currently being available?
Sure. So the site readiness one I know a fair amount about because I'm working with a couple of grantees right now. One that was up in Westminster, one now in Chicopee. aware of some other projects in the area. New Bedford has gotten some big grants, site readiness grants. The overall idea from the state on these is that there's just not that, Massachusetts doesn't have a lot of excess, land as opposed to some other parts of the country. So when, people are looking at doing larger development projects or need larger land sites, we're not always, as a state, as well positioned as we'd like to be. Plus, sometimes areas that seem ripe for development have lots of different owners, and it can be tricky to, have sites, multiple parcels ready to go for development projects. So the state started this program about 1.5 years ago, you can do a few different. You can do market analysis. You can do environmental and engineering work on sites. But one of the specific things that you can do is work towards site assembly and coming up with a plan for how best to assemble the kind of land you'd want to meet your development needs and opportunities. And so, what could happen is that you could do, in essence, a form of a master plan through a site readiness grant that helps to lay out how actual buildings and properties could develop over time, and that could help you strategize which parcels you would need to somehow acquire or shift around, as well as a plan in terms of addressing the wetlands issues that do exist on the site. And so it's you need to have industrial or commercial business opportunities, which we think exist in this area, and Mass Development, I think, is very actively wanting to partner and pursue these kinds of projects. On the opportunity zone side of things, that is new as of the federal tax reform and corporate tax cut that came about 6 months ago or so. And so it's targeted towards lower income communities, trying to attract more private investment. Brockton had a few different areas designated, and one of them is up this way in the Exit 18 study area. The trick there is that you need actual eligible projects to invest in. So, for example, if we were able to identify, with the hospital and maybe other partners or developers, a recovery center private, or project, or a daycare facility, or senior housing, those could be projects that the private sector could then help invest in. They then get, pretty significant tax credits, depending on how long they hold on to their investment, and so it's a way to basically try to entice some private interest in projects that otherwise might not have as much interest, or in communities that aren't seeing as much private investment. So
the site readiness funds, do you know how much are usually assigned to each project, or?
The grant sizes range from, as low as like $75,000 or so, up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's typically, and maybe even a little bit larger than that. It's typically not to say, do actually acquire, because although that's possible, depending on the price level, I guess, of some properties. But from what I've seen, it's been mostly about trying to get, a very, good detailed plan, or engineering drawings, or environmental status updates. So, like on the wetlands side, like actually doing the work to determine a replication plan, and understanding the different local, state, and federal kind of guidelines and regulations that you'd have to work through, and what that process might look like. On site assembly, it might be, here are the 5 or 6 parcels that would really help to be able to expand some development opportunities, and how would you go about trying to acquire those areas for development.
Thank you. With traditional retail malls, there seems to be a transition happening here with the advent of Amazon and online retailers.
Right.
Would a grant from Mass Development be suitable for the mall, looking at what their future might lie in terms of shifting needs in the community and possible uses of that land?
Potentially. I think as I understand, the site readiness grants are really geared towards trying to pursue and position for industrial and commercial opportunities. So if it was along the lines of a recognition of some of the challenges of operating a traditional retail mall, and looking at how might that area transition over time to some other kinds of commercial uses, such as office, or office and residential, or office with some retail and residential. I think that is possible. You would just have to make sure that it was, if you're solely going after like a mixed-use development project with 5 stories of residential and first floor retail, that probably is not going to get you a grant. But if you're trying to position a large area for its future commercial use, then that probably could be viable.
There are examples that you're aware of where biotech or life science companies in Massachusetts or other areas moved into areas like this. I know there's a couple of examples of Canton, some companies coming to the state and asking about the different levels of certification for different communities, and platinum was assigned to Canton, and Canton actually landed Organogenesis, right? But I just wondering if there's some examples out there.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the life sciences industry is thought of as very much, a Cambridge and now a Cambridge in Boston, or a Kendall Square kind of focus thing. And the reality is that the industry is now so large in the state, and there's so many different aspects to it, including suppliers and contract manufacturers and more back office lab activity, as opposed to maybe some of the higher end where you need the PhDs doing everything. That the state is seeing opportunities spread out a little bit more geographically, and like that Lynn Laboratories example, and some others that are in that corner of Brockton near Bridgewater, having some decent highway access, having some ability to customize existing buildings. There has been some success. I think what I would keep in mind is that most companies care about time to market. So unless it's one of the really big opportunities that are looking for a lot of land, in a lot of cases they're looking for existing space or buildings that are customizable. So for example, like the empty space that's sitting in the the office building on the Stewart site, like if that could be perhaps updated and marketed and reach that platinum status, that could help be like an early win, because it seems that a lot of if you're not a particularly large company, you don't want to take the time to build your own. You want to move into existing space.
And speaking of that, I think it was last November or December, right around the time the governor visited us here in the Metro South region and addressed our chamber, he signed an expansion of his commitment, or the state's commitment, to BioLife Sciences that was signed back 10 years ago. It was $1 billion over the next 10 years. He's committed now $500 million
Right.
going forward. Do you expect there will be additional opportunities for communities like Brockton and Metro South to tap into resources there?
Yeah, so the Mass Life Sciences Center, which I referenced here, they are the focal point, I think, for helping to work with those state funds that, like you say, the Baker administration, in essence, re-upped, the state's commitment towards, this industry. And I think a lot of people, think that the progress that was made over the last 10 years was partly based on the state making a very explicit commitment. They had a strength, and they made a commitment to kind of keep that strength and expand it. And this work is, I think, a similar kind of message out there, and it's why people continue to be very bullish, optimistic about the industry. And so, for sure, there's plenty of reasons for Brockton to try to position itself to capture some of that opportunity.